Hey, this is Gina Duke with Churchtown Ministries. I am talking about being God-led and how we're able to discern God leading us through life's decisions. And sometimes He does that through establishing a pattern that we will be familiar with, where we can think, well, He's done this before. It seems very familiar to me, and He possibly is dealing with me again. So I'm going to talk to you about how God established a pattern with me that I can recognize when He is leading me. The first time that He ever did this was when my husband and I were looking at whether or not we were going to build a house or buy a house. We actually had some land, and our intent was to build. But we really didn't feel comfortable about that. We didn't feel good about that. We didn't feel glad about that. And my husband decided that we should look at some homes that were being built in a new subdivision in our town. So we toured a lot of homes, and at the end of every one of those tours, my husband would say, I just don't like it. And I didn't see any that I liked either. Well, at that time, my mother and I decided to have a yard sale together. So I'm at her house, and we're having a yard sale, and they happened to be building another subdivision right across the street from my parents' home. And the homes were a little bit smaller than what we were looking for, so we hadn't really considered this particular subdivision. Well, through the course of the day, as things got slow, I walked over and did a walkthrough of the model home and another home that they already had built. And I just thought, well, they're nice, and I didn't think about them any more than that. So I went home, went to bed. The next morning when I woke up, it was like such clarity. Like, that's where I needed to be living, in that model home. It was just clear as a bell to me. So I told my husband, I said, I want you to go over and look at this house with me. And so later that day, we went and we looked at the house. We walked through the house. We toured the house. And at the end, my husband said, I like it. And so that was kind of a confirmation that this is the house for us. So we called the builder. And the builder actually was open to selling the model home. And we actually had him add on a little bit more for us to the house, and we purchased the home. Well, for confirmation, every time that I tell people where I live, you would be surprised at the number of people that respond with, you know, my mother looked at buying that house, or we looked at buying that house, or my cousin was going to look at buying that house. But the builder wouldn't sell it to us. And even my neighbor who had bought the other house that was vacant, just at the same time I viewed the model home, when she came over to meet us, she was a little bit perturbed because she tried to buy the same house that we had just bought, and the builder would not sell it because it was his model home. And it was almost like the Lord was telling me, that house was meant for me. This was my house. He had saved it for me. He had reserved it for me. And so that was one particular time where I felt like the Lord spoke to me with just this moment of clarity. It's the only way that I can explain it, is like when I woke up. I had this happen again. I was in a particular job, and I'd only been there 6 months, but I was there really out of disobedience to the Lord. I wasn't supposed to be there, but that's where I was working. And I had a plant manager call me that was looking for an HR position, and I'd worked for this gentleman before. So he called me up and wanted to know if I wanted to come work at that particular company. Well, that particular company he worked for had this very aggressive culture, and it had been a long time since I'd worked in one of those companies. I'd been working for some very progressive companies, and even the company that I worked for at that moment, they're like #1 as far as an automotive supplier. I was in a brand new facility. It was pristine. It was beautiful. And I thought, there is no way I'm going to leave this employer and come work for that employer. And so immediately I said no. That was no. They didn't have a good reputation, and I wasn't going to make that change. The next morning when I woke up, again, it was almost clear as a bell that that's exactly where the Lord wanted me to be. And it was very much like this scenario I had experienced several years ago when the Lord said, this is the house that is for you. And so I paid attention to that because I really felt like this was the Lord possibly speaking to me. I talked it over with my husband, and I interviewed with that company, and it was just very clear it's like Colossians 3:15. It says, "Let the peace of Christ reign in your heart." And I had that peace and that realization that this is where God was leading me. And actually, if I'd stayed in the job I'd had before, coming to my 6-month employer, this is probably right where the Lord had led me anyway. And so I went and took that job. And I have to tell you, of all the places I've worked, it was an aggressive culture. It was kind of difficult sometimes to work for. But I was very satisfied with what I was able to accomplish there. I just felt like everything just clicked into place, and I was able to do things I really hadn't been able to do at some of the other companies that I worked for. And so sometimes God establishes a pattern with us that we will recognize when we're making other decisions. So keep up with what God is doing and how He's led you in the past, and try to gauge if what you're going through right now is similar to how God has led you previously, because He does establish patterns with us. I do believe that. So hopefully, if you're trying to look at making a change in your life, this is something that will help you. God bless.